So now we're going to talk a little bit about how inventions, certainly innovations, change the way we communicate. And if we look at this list, we can recognize many of these pivotal inventions that really change the way we engage with visual information, being able to delete photos as we take them, share them on the internet instantly through our cell phones, but also take a look at how even simple things such as cars, the internet itself, now we have FaceTime, how does that impact the way we communicate with each other? So, one thing I always want to remind us all is just a tool. So, just like any tool, we want to take a look at what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve? And will this tool help us achieve that goal? It's easy to get caught up in the bells and whistles, the new gadgets, but it's very important as educators to think about what you're trying to achieve and how can this tool help you. And in some cases, the tool may shift the way you think in terms of how you could deliver content and information and help facilitate learning. Another important consideration when we're looking at this is who has access. This is an early endeavor, one laptop per child, which was a real attempt to try to get developing countries access to this type of technology because it's changing the way we think about getting information, collaborating, etc. And so students and young people who don't even understand how this works are going to be left behind as the technology changes so quickly. So, what is technology? This is just a quick snapshot, of course, of um, a way we might define it. And I like the sum of society or cultural's practice knowledge. And it's interesting to think about technical and knowledge tools. And if we look at us as educators, how do we utilize the technology to facilitate the best path to learning? Let's go back and think about how powerful it was that the printing process, movable type being invented, oral history moving to a printed page was a massive revolution in communication. And certainly we have the Gutenberg Bible on a printing press, which advanced that notion, and it was one of the first documents that began to open up the door to the masses having access to information that previously was really in the hands of a few. And we can see that same trend with the internet, where we're having global access to information. And yet, remember, there are still many people who cannot access the internet. Much like the Pony Express coming through rural areas and bringing the mail, we're struggling now to try to get internet access even to rural America. And we can't assume that everybody has that access. So communication was changed. When you think about a simple thing like the ballpoint pen, where we take that for granted, when it first came out for sale at Macy's, there were 400 people waiting at the door. And imagine what it must have been like to write when you had to dip your pen in ink and wait for it to dry. So the ballpoint pen, much like these other inventions, really were dramatic in the change in the way we communicate and the tools that we had to communicate. Martin Cooper here with one of the first cell phones that were public rather than military. And looks like a big brick on his head. And now look at how we have a cell phone in our hand which has massive communication technology in it. So the evolution of digital communication has had a powerful influence on teaching and learning for sure. And now we are looking at how do we build our information sharing so that it will be easily accessible from a cell phone. And just to give a perspective on how quickly things have changed, if we look back to 1980, fax, modem, answering machines were these radical inventions. And it's only been a few decades to where we are now in using cell phones to have FaceTime and having Google Maps and amazing satellite technology to keep us connected across the globe. So this is just a quick view of the quick pace of changes. And have we been able to keep up with it? I think in many cases, particularly older faculty are reeling at this change and trying to get a grapple with how we can implement it and reach the students who actually were born with it in their hands. And so let's take a look at that. The influence of technology. has been a rapid change from sort of mechanical through the Walkman into the computer and the laptop, cell phones, and really becoming major mainstream in 2010. And then, of course, this interconnected um, technology that has a huge influence on our lives. So, what communication technology impacted the boomers? As we grew up, and again, we've looked at the characteristics in week one, but if you look at the tools that we had, one of the big impacts, which I think is kind of amusing, is many boomers learned computers using DOS. And DOS was a tool that, in fact, if you hit the wrong button, you could kind of blow it up and lose everything. And so boomers are fascinated and enamored with the younger generations who just push every button looking like fearless geniuses, when in fact, the newer generations started using computers when the user interface protected them from being able to blow it up. So I say that boomers have post-DOS traumatic syndrome. Gen X, what were some of the tools that they had access to? Certainly the photocopy machine created zines, which was self-published communication access, so the publishing houses didn't have all the power. Video games came out. It was the beginning of rendering and creating a different reality. And as we know, this generation was raised up in a very different world than the boomers. And then what about Gen Y? Gen Y was raised with very interactive toys, lots of multimedia, music, sounds, touch games, buttons hitting. So they were very much connected to technology and interactivity from an early age. And social networks became a way that they connected through the internet, and not necessarily like the Gen X, who might have connected by going to malls or gathering after school. And then we can't forget that Gen Z is coming up. And so Gen Z literally has been connected from birth. And what does that mean in terms of their learning capacities or expectations? When I travel on the airplane, I see so many young infants manipulating and navigating cell phones with ease. And it's quite remarkable. And so what does this mean for us as teachers in terms of this learner showing up in the classroom? And they already are in the classroom and they're starting to show up in college. So how has that impacted your world as a teacher? Gen Z is very connected. I love this picture because I like to say, well, they're just texting each other. And so how has that influenced managing a classroom setting? There are many faculty who say you can't bring your cell phones and laptops into the classroom, while others have realized that they can tap this tool and really create engaged learning. And so where do you stand in terms of utilizing these tools in your classroom? So how do we use educational technology? Check the next slide set out and we'll get into that.